kicked out of home. She sleeps in a car in the woodlands. But what was in the trunk changes everything. Sophie was only 6 years old when her life changed forever. The little girl walked along the dirt road, carrying a torn school backpack, her eyes full of tears she stubbornly tried to dry with the backs of her dirty hands. The argument with her stepmother had started early that morning. Brenda was shouting that she couldn't stand taking care of other people's children anymore, that the money the girl's father sent barely covered the basics, and that now that she had found a new boyfriend, she didn't want any more burdens in the house. The words cut deep into the child's heart, but Sophie knew it was no use crying or begging. Brenda had already made up her mind. The girl gathered her few things and walked out the door with no clear destination, only certain that she needed to find a place to sleep before dark. The sun was beginning to set when Sophie spotted something different among the trees. It was an old car, completely covered in green moss and dry leaves, as if nature itself had decided to reclaim it. The vehicle seemed to have once been blue, but now it was more green than any other color. The windows were fogged with moisture and time, and small plants had sprouted from the seams of the bodywork. The girl approached slowly, first touching the hood covered in soft moss. It was surprisingly warm, as if the metal still held the day's heat. She tried to open the driver's door, and to her surprise, it gave way with a loud creak that echoed through the silent woodlands. The inside of the car smelled of damp earth and old leaves, but the leather seats, though stained, still looked comfortable. Sophie sat in the back seat, and for the first time since morning, allowed herself to cry freely. Tears streamed down her dirty face as she hugged the backpack to her chest. When hunger began to gnaw at her, the girl remembered she had seen some wild berries along the way. She got out of the car and managed to gather some ripe blackberries she found on a nearby tree. It wasn't much, but it would fool her stomach until she could think of a better solution. Back in the car, Sophie noticed that the trunk didn't seem to be fully closed. A childlike curiosity took over her. Perhaps there was something useful inside, like a blanket or even some food forgotten by the previous owner. With some effort, she managed to lift the trunk lid. What she saw inside made her heart race. There was a rusty metal box, the kind people use to keep important documents. The lid was loose, and through the crack Sophie could see old photographs. The first photo she picked up showed a smiling man next to the same car, only new and shiny. The man seemed familiar somehow, but she couldn't place from where. There were other photos too. A beautiful young woman, children playing, families gathered around tables full of food. But it was when Sophie picked up the third photograph that her world turned upside down. The image showed a girl of about 5, with dark hair and bright eyes, standing next to the same car. And this girl was identical to her mother, Catherine, as a child. Sophie recognized the photo because her mother had a very similar one kept in her dresser drawer. With hands trembling with emotion, the girl turned the photograph over. There, in careful, faded handwriting, was written, "Catherine, age 5, in Daddy Arthur's car, 1985. Catherine was her mother, and the car where she had decided to sleep belonged to her grandfather, a man she had never met, but whom her mother sometimes mentioned with eyes full of longing. Sophie continued exploring the box with a mixture of anxiety and hope. There were letters yellowed with time, tied with a faded red string. The first letter she managed to open was addressed to my dear Catherine and was signed Daddy with all my love. The girl couldn't read very well yet, but she recognized some familiar words. Her heart pounded because she knew she was finding pieces of her family's story, pieces that no one had ever told her. Among the papers, she found something that especially caught her attention, a hand-drawn map showing several houses and properties scattered throughout the region. Some were marked with names she recognized from her mother's conversations: Aunt Martha's house, Cousin Thomas's farm, Mrs. Margaret's schoolhouse. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The next morning, Sophie woke up with rays of sunlight filtered through the foliage hitting her face. She had slept better than she imagined, lulled by the gentle sound of the woodlands and the strange feeling of being connected to her family history. The discovery from the day before still pulsed in her heart, like a promise that perhaps she wasn't as alone in the world as she thought. The first thing she did was carefully organize the documents she had found. She set aside the most important photographs, including the one of her mother as a child, and folded the map with special care. These things would be her only clues to finding the family that, until then, existed only in the hazy memories her mother shared in moments of nostalgia. Her mother, Catherine, had passed away 2 years before, a victim of pneumonia that couldn't be cured in time. Since then, Sophie had lived with Brenda, the woman her father had arranged to care for her before he left to look for work in Chicago. Brenda never showed much affection for the girl, but at least she offered a roof and food. Now not even that remained. Sophie decided she would follow the map, starting with the nearest location marked as Mrs. Margaret's schoolhouse. If her memory was correct, her mother had mentioned this woman a few times, always with a special fondness in her voice. Perhaps it was a good place to start. The walk to the schoolhouse took almost 2 hours along trails and dirt roads. Sophie stopped frequently to rest and check if she was following the correct direction on the yellowed map. With each step, she felt a mixture of fear and hope growing in her chest. The school was smaller than she had imagined, a simple brick building with 2 classrooms and a small yard where some children were playing during recess. Sophie watched from a distance, gathering the courage to approach. It was then that a lady with graying hair and round glasses came out of the school carrying a stack of notebooks. Something in the affectionate way she spoke to the children running past made Sophie believe this could be Mrs. Margaret. "Hi, ma'am," called Sophie, using the respectful address her mother had taught her for speaking to elders. The woman stopped and looked at the girl with curiosity mixed with concern. It was evident that Sophie had spent the night outdoors and that her clothes were wrinkled and dirty. "Hello, dear. Are you lost?" asked Mrs. Margaret in a gentle voice. "Are you the Mrs. Margaret who knew my mother, Catherine?" The teacher's face transformed into an expression of surprise. She lowered the notebooks and knelt to the girl's height. "Catherine? You're Catherine's daughter. Good heavens, how you've grown. I knew you when you were just a tiny baby." Sophie felt immense relief upon seeing she was on the right path. She took from her backpack the photograph of her mother as a child next to the car. "I found this photo in my grandfather's car. Did you know him too, Mrs.?" Margaret took the photograph with delicate hands, as if touching a sacred relic. Her eyes filled with tears. "Of course I knew your grandfather, Arthur. He was a good, hard-working man. And this car, how many times did he come pick me up to bring supplies to the schoolhouse?" She looked intently at Sophie. "But tell me, dear, where is your mother? Why are you alone?" Sophie told her, with the innocence and sincerity typical of childhood, about her mother's departure, about life with Brenda, and about how she had been thrown out of the house. Mrs. Margaret listened to everything in silence, her heart tight with compassion. "And where did you sleep last night?" she asked, already fearing the answer. "In Grandpa Arthur's car. It's in the woodlands, all green with moss. That's where I found the photos and the map." Mrs. Margaret fell silent for a long moment, processing everything she had heard. As a retired but still active teacher in a rural school, she had witnessed many difficult situations involving children. But something special about this girl touched her heart in a different way. "You must be hungry, aren't you? Let's go inside. I have a sandwich left over from my lunch." Inside the schoolhouse, Mrs. Margaret offered food and fresh water to Sophie, who ate with the voracity of someone who had gone hours without a proper meal. While the girl ate, the teacher examined the photographs and documents she had brought more closely. "These documents are very important, Sophie. They are family records going back decades. Your grandfather, Arthur, was a very well-liked man here in the region." She pointed to the map. "I see you found the map of the family properties. Some of these people still live around here. Can you help me find them?" Mrs. Margaret hesitated. She knew the situation was complicated. She couldn't simply keep the girl without authorization, but she also didn't have the heart to hand her back to a stepmother who had thrown her out. On the other hand, she knew some of the people mentioned on the map, and knew that not all of them would be receptive to an unknown child showing up at their doors. "Look, Sophie, here's what I'll do. Today you stay here with me. Tomorrow we'll talk to the school principal and see what steps we can take to really help you. How about that?" Sophie agreed, feeling safer than she had felt in a long time. Mrs. Margaret arranged a small mattress in the classroom and brought some clean blankets. For the first time since she had left home, Sophie slept safely. The next day, however, things got complicated. The school principal, a pragmatic woman concerned with regulations, was alarmed to learn that a retired teacher had taken in a minor without following proper procedures. "Margaret, you can't just keep this child. What if her parents show up? What if there are legal implications? The school could lose its accreditation." Mrs. Margaret tried to explain the situation, but the principal was unyielding. She would give a deadline of 48 hours for Sophie to find a suitable family solution. Otherwise, she would have to call the city's social services. It was then that Sophie suggested something that surprised everyone. "Mrs. Margaret, the map shows I have an aunt who lives on a cottage near here. Maybe she'll take me in." Mrs. Margaret consulted the map and confirmed it. There was indeed a property marked as Martha's Cottage, and she vaguely remembered a woman by that name who had been related to Arthur's family. "Martha, yes, I remember her. She was your grandmother's sister. But I haven't seen her in town for years. Some say she became very private after she lost her husband." "Can I try to talk to her?" Mrs. Margaret pondered. It was risky, but perhaps it was the only viable option within the principal's deadline. She decided to accompany Sophie to Martha's cottage, both to ensure the girl's safety and to serve as a mediator if the conversation did not go well. The cottage was about 5 kilometers from the schoolhouse, on a dirt road that climbed gently between green pastures and small crops. The place was beautiful, well kept, but there was something melancholy in the air, as if loneliness had settled there long ago. The house was a single story, painted white with blue details on the windows and doors. There was a garden in front with well-tended flowers and a few fruit trees that provided cool shade for the yard. But there was no movement, no sign of life except for the occasional lowing of some cows in the pasture in the distance. Mrs. Margaret clapped her hands in front of the gate, following the rural custom of announcing a visit. "Mrs. Martha! Mrs. Martha, you have visitors." After a few minutes, a woman appeared on the porch. She must have been about 55, her hair still dark and tied in a simple bun, wearing clean work clothes but without much vanity. Her eyes were deep and expressive, but there was a hardness in them that spoke of years of disappointment and loneliness. "Mrs. Margaret, what brings you out here?" asked Martha, keeping her distance. "Hello, Martha. I brought someone who would like to talk to you. This is Sophie, your brother-in-law Arthur's granddaughter." Martha lowered her eyes to the girl, and Sophie could see a subtle change in her expression. It was as if an old memory had been awakened. "Arthur's granddaughter? How so?" Sophie took a step forward, taking from her backpack the photograph of her mother as a child. "I'm Catherine's daughter. This is a picture of her when she was little, in Grandpa Arthur's car." Martha came down from the porch and approached, taking the photograph with hands that trembled slightly. She was silent for a long time, as if reliving long-buried memories. "Catherine, yes, I remember Catherine, a clever girl full of life." Her voice softened. "And you are her daughter?" "I am. My mother passed 2 years ago, and I was living with my stepmother, but she threw me out. I found Grandpa's car in the woodlands and found the family map. That's why I came looking for you." Martha looked at Mrs. Margaret, seeking confirmation of this unlikely story. "It's true, Martha. The girl showed up at the schoolhouse yesterday, alone and hungry. She really did find old family documents in Arthur's abandoned car." "And where is your father?" asked Martha, addressing the girl again. "He went to work in Chicago. I don't know when he'll be back." Martha was thoughtful for a moment. There was something about this child's presence that stirred feelings she had locked away in her heart years ago. The girl had the same expressive eyes of the family, the same sweet stubbornness she remembered from Catherine as a child. "Come in," she said finally. "Let's talk properly." The inside of the house was clean and tidy, but Spartan. There were no photographs on the walls, few decorations, just the essentials for a simple and solitary life. Martha served fresh water and homemade shortbread, while observing Sophie with growing curiosity. "Tell me properly what happened," she asked, sitting at the wooden kitchen table. Sophie repeated her story, showing all the documents and photographs she had found. Martha examined each item carefully, and Mrs. Margaret could see that, with each moment, the woman's expression grew softer. "These letters," murmured Martha, picking up one of the yellowed correspondences. "I recognize Arthur's handwriting. He always wrote to the whole family, trying to keep everyone together. Did you know my grandfather well?" "I did, yes. He was married to my older sister, Esther. They were good people, honest workers. When they left—" Martha stopped mid-sentence, as if certain memories were too painful to share. Mrs. Margaret noticed the hesitation and decided to gently intervene. "Martha, the girl is in a difficult situation. Her stepmother doesn't want her at home anymore. Her father is away working and she has nowhere to go. I thought perhaps you could—" "Could what? Raise someone else's child?" The hardness returned to Martha's tone. "I've been through that once. It didn't work out." Sophie lowered her eyes, feeling yet another door was closing on her, but something in Martha's answer had sparked her childish curiosity. "What didn't work out, Aunt Martha?" The girl's simple and direct question caught Martha off guard. She looked into those innocent eyes and felt something break inside her chest. "A long time ago, when I was still young and full of dreams, my husband and I tried to adopt a child. But things got complicated. The bureaucracy was difficult, and in the end, the child went to another family. It was one of the most painful moments of my life." "And after that, you never wanted to try again?" "After that, I preferred to live alone. It's safer that way. No expectations, no disappointments." Mrs. Margaret and Sophie fell silent, processing that revelation. It was evident that Martha had built emotional walls to protect herself from more suffering, but it was also clear that those walls were being tested by the girl's presence. "Aunt Martha," said Sophie with the sincerity typical of childhood, "I didn't come here to cause trouble. I just wanted to meet my family and have a place to stay until my father comes back. I promise I'm an obedient girl and I can help with the housework." Something in that innocent promise touched Martha's heart deeply. She looked at the girl for a long moment, seeing there not just a child in need, but also an opportunity to reconnect with the family she had lost years ago. "Do you know how to do anything? Cook, clean?" "Yes, I do. My mother taught me before she passed. I know how to make meatloaf and mashed potatoes, and I know how to sweep and wash dishes too." "And school? Do you go to school?" "Yes, Aunt. I'm in 2nd grade, and I already know how to read a little." Martha looked at Mrs. Margaret, who discreetly nodded, encouraging her to give the girl a chance. "All right," she said finally. "You can stay here for now. But there are rules. You'll keep going to school. You'll help with the housework, and if your father shows up or sends for you, you'll leave without making a fuss." "Agreed." Sophie felt her heart leap with joy. She jumped from the chair and gave Martha a spontaneous hug, who stiffened for a moment, before hesitantly returning the affection. "Thank you, Aunt Martha. I promise I'll be a very good girl." Mrs. Margaret smiled, feeling she had helped orchestrate something good. But she knew this was only the beginning. Martha was a woman marked by loss and disappointment, and Sophie was a child who had faced abandonment and rejection. It would take time and patience for that living arrangement to work out. In the following days, Sophie adapted to the routine of the cottage with an ease that surprised even Martha. The girl woke up early, helped tend to the animals, had a simple but nutritious breakfast, went to school with Mrs. Margaret, who had offered to pick her up every day, returned in the late afternoon, and still helped with the household chores. But what impressed Martha the most was the girl's constant attitude of gratitude. Sophie never complained about anything, always said thank you and please, and showed a genuine interest in life at the cottage. She asked questions about the plants, about the animals, about the traditions of the family she had lost so long ago. "Aunt Martha, why did my mother never bring me here before?" The question arose on a Saturday afternoon, as the two were in the garden picking ripe tomatoes. Martha stopped what she was doing and looked at the girl with a thoughtful expression. "Your mother and I hadn't spoken for many years. Why? Adult matters, things a girl your age doesn't need to worry about." But Sophie wasn't satisfied with that evasive answer. With the typical persistence of children, she kept insisting, But I want to know. She was my family too, wasn't she? Martha sighed, realizing she couldn't avoid that conversation forever. She sat on a wooden bench she had built under a fruit tree and motioned for Sophie to sit beside her. When your mother grew up, she fell in love with your father, who wasn't from around here. We all thought she was too young to marry, but she was determined. There were arguments, harsh words were said, and in the end she left home angry with the whole family. And you never spoke again? I tried a few times, but pride got in the way, on both sides. Martha's voice grew melancholy. When I learned she had passed, it was too late to fix things. Sophie was silent for a moment, processing that information. Then, with the simple wisdom only children possess, she said, "But now I'm here, and I can tell you all about my mother if you want." Martha felt her eyes well up. For years she had wondered about Catherine's life, if she had been happy, if she had managed to achieve her dreams. And there was her granddaughter, offering the answers she had never dared to seek. "I would very much like to hear," she murmured. And so, on that sunny afternoon in the cottage garden, Sophie began to tell stories about her mother. She talked about how Catherine would sing while cooking, about the stories she made up at bedtime, about how she cared for Sophie when she was sick. Each shared memory was like a bridge being built between the lost past and the present that was being redrawn. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. The weeks passed and life at the cottage found a natural rhythm. Sophie thrived in the welcoming environment that Martha, almost without realizing it, had created for her. The girl gained weight, her eyes shone brighter, and her cheerful personality began to awaken the house that had remained silent for so many years. But not everything was smooth sailing. One morning, as Sophie was returning from school, she found Martha sitting on the porch with a worried expression. In her hands, she held a letter that had arrived in the mail. "What is it, Aunt Martha? Is something wrong?" "Sit here, Sophie. I need to talk to you about something important." The girl felt a tightening in her heart. Over the past weeks, she had begun to believe she had finally found a real home. Martha's serious expression made her fear that it might be coming to an end. "This letter is from a lawyer in the city. It seems your stepmother Brenda is demanding that you return home." "But she threw me out. She didn't want me there anymore." "I know, dear, but legally she's still your guardian until your father returns, and apparently she's changed her mind." Sophie fell silent, trying to process that information. After weeks of peace and affection, the idea of returning to the house where she had never felt wanted was terrifying. "I don't want to go back, Aunt Martha." "I know, dear, I don't want you to go either." Martha put her arm around the girl's shoulders. "But we're going to have to find a way to resolve this situation." That night, Martha stayed up late, thinking of alternatives. She knew some lawyers in the city, people who might be able to help. She also knew she would need Mrs. Margaret's help, who had become a sort of witness to Sophie's situation. The next day, Martha went to the schoolhouse to talk with Mrs. Margaret about the letter. The teacher was outraged to learn that Brenda wanted the girl back. "That woman is a gold digger," exclaimed Mrs. Margaret. "I bet she found out she could get some benefit by having the girl at home, or else she figured out some way to make money from the situation." "That's what I thought too. But how can we prove it?" "Martha, have you thought about trying to locate Sophie's father? If we could speak with him, maybe he could officially authorize her to stay with you." The suggestion made sense, but it seemed almost impossible to carry out. Sophie only knew that her father had gone to work in Chicago, but she had no address or phone number for contact. "The girl doesn't know where he is exactly." "No, she told me he promised to write, but so far no letter has arrived." It was then that Mrs. Margaret had an idea. "What if we searched the very car where Sophie found the documents? Maybe there are more things there that could help us." The suggestion seemed promising. The following afternoon, Martha, Mrs. Margaret, and Sophie went to the woodlands where Arthur's car was abandoned. It was the first time Martha had seen the vehicle since the time her brother-in-law was still alive, and the emotion almost overwhelmed her. "My, how time has passed," she murmured, touching the moss-covered hood. Together they searched every corner of the car for more clues. In the glove compartment, They found an old address book with numbers and addresses written by hand. Many were illegible due to moisture, but some could still be deciphered. "Look here," said Mrs. Margaret, pointing to a page. "There's a number written down as Thomas, cousin, Chicago. Maybe this Thomas knows where Sophie's father is." Martha copied the number onto a piece of paper. It was a small hope, but it was better than nothing. That same night, Martha called the noted number. After several attempts, she managed to speak with a man named Thomas, who confirmed he was a cousin of the family and lived in a city about 200 kilometers away. "Thomas, this is Martha, Conceição's sister, who was married to Arthur." "Martha. My, how long has it been? How are you?" "I'm well, Thomas. Look, I'm calling because I need your help. Do you know a man named Daniel, who was married to Catherine, Arthur's daughter?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Daniel? Of course I know him. He works here at an auto parts factory. Why do you want to know about him?" Martha quickly explained the situation. Thomas was shocked to learn that Daniel had a daughter living in such precarious conditions. "Martha? That man knows nothing about this. He told me his daughter was well cared for by her stepmother, that she was even doing well in school. He sends money every month." "Sends money where?" "To Brenda's account, the girl's stepmother." That confirmed the suspicions of Martha and Mrs. Margaret. Brenda was receiving the money Daniel sent for Sophie's care, but was probably using it for other purposes. "Thomas, can you speak with Daniel and ask him to call me? It's urgent." "Of course, Martha, I'll speak with him yet today." The next morning, Martha's phone rang early. It was Daniel, worried and confused by the information he had received. "Mrs. Martha, this is Daniel, Sophie's father. Thomas told me some things I don't quite understand. Isn't my daughter living with Brenda?" Martha explained the whole situation, how Sophie had been thrown out of the house, how she had found the car in the woodlands, how she had come to her through the family documents. Daniel was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. "Mrs. Martha, I didn't know any of this. Brenda would call me sometimes saying everything was fine, that Sophie was doing well in school, that she didn't need anything else. I sent the money every month thinking I was fulfilling my duty as a father. Daniel, your daughter is a wonderful girl, but she went through some very difficult times. Now Brenda wants her back, probably because she found out she might lose the money you send." "That woman deceived me," Daniel exploded in anger. "How can she do this to a child? The question now is what we do from here on out. Sophie is happy here with me. She's doing well in school. She's healthy and cared for. But legally, Brenda still has custody of her." Daniel was thoughtful for a few moments. "Mrs. Martha, would you agree to keep my daughter? Truly, not just for now." The question took Martha by surprise. During the last few weeks, she had grown so attached to Sophie that the idea of separating from her had become unthinkable. But officially, taking responsibility for a child was a big step, one that would change her life forever. "Daniel, I need to be honest with you. Your daughter brought a joy to my life that I hadn't felt in years. If you trust me, I promise to care for her as if she were my own granddaughter. Then it's decided. I'll come back there next week. We'll settle this legal situation once and for all, and I'll officially transfer Sophie's custody to you." When Martha hung up the phone, she felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Finally, there was a solution in sight, but she knew there would still be obstacles ahead. Brenda certainly wouldn't give up without a fight, especially if she was making money from the situation. Sophie, who had overheard part of the conversation from the kitchen, appeared in the living room with eyes shining with hope. "Aunt Martha, did my father say I can stay here with you?" "He did, dear. He's coming here next week to get everything sorted out properly." Sophie ran to hug Martha, who received her in her arms with an affection she hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you, Aunt Martha. You're the best aunt in the world." But not everything would be as simple as it seemed. 2 days later, a van stopped in front of the cottage, and out stepped Brenda, accompanied by a man in a suit who introduced himself as a court officer. "I've come to get Sophie," announced Brenda with a fake smile. "She has to come back home." Martha came out of the house accompanied by Sophie, who immediately hid behind her aunt's skirt. Brenda, the girl is not going with you. Not. Her father already knows the whole situation and is coming back to settle everything legally. Her father has nothing to do with this, Brenda retorted. He gave me legal responsibility for the girl when he left. I have the documents right here. The court officer, a middle-aged man with a tired expression, stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I have a court order to deliver the minor to the legal guardian. Martha felt desperation growing in her chest. She knew she couldn't resist a court order, but the idea of handing Sophie over to that cold, self-interested woman was unbearable. Please, she begged. The girl is happy here. She's well cared for. See for yourselves how healthy she is. It doesn't matter, said Brenda impatiently. She's my responsibility, and she's coming home now. It was then that Sophie, gathering all the courage her age allowed, stepped forward. I don't want to go. Brenda threw me out of the house and said she didn't want me anymore. Now she only wants to take me back because my father sends her money. The court officer stopped and looked more carefully at the situation. The girl's accusation was serious and deserved investigation. What's this about you throwing her out of the house? Brenda became visibly nervous. That's a child's lie. She left on her own. I didn't throw anyone out. That's a lie, shouted Sophie. You said you'd found a new boyfriend and didn't want any more trouble at home. The officer looked from Brenda to Martha, sensing there was more to the story than met the eye. Look, Mrs. Brenda, I'm going to have to bring this situation to the judge's attention. I can't hand over a child in a conflict like this without a proper investigation. But I have a court order. The court order will be carried out when I'm sure it's in the child's best interest. For now, she stays where she is. Brenda was furious, but there was nothing more she could do at that moment. She left promising she'd return with lawyers and wouldn't let this go cheaply. After the van drove away, Martha knelt in front of Sophie. You were very brave, dear. I was scared, Aunt Martha, but I couldn't let that woman lie. That night, Martha called Daniel again, telling him what had happened. He became even more determined to resolve the situation quickly. Mrs. Martha, I'm going to request leave from work and travel there tomorrow. I can't let my daughter go through this. That would be very good, Daniel. I think your presence here will speed things up. Daniel arrived at the cottage the following afternoon. He was a man in his 30s, with the tired look of someone who works hard, but his eyes lit up when he saw Sophie running toward him. Daddy! Daddy! The girl shouted, jumping into his arms. Hi, my princess. How you've grown. Father and daughter hugged for a long time, making up for the months of separation. Daniel examined his daughter's face, noticing how much stronger and rosier-cheeked she looked. You're being well taken care of, aren't you? Yes, Daddy. Aunt Martha is very good to me. She taught me how to make shortbread and lets me help in the garden. Daniel looked at Martha with sincere gratitude. Mrs. Martha, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for my daughter. No need to thank me, Daniel. She brought a joy to my life I didn't even know I was missing. In the following days, Daniel dedicated himself to resolving the legal matter. He hired a lawyer from Chicago and began the process to remove Sophie's custody from Brenda and officially transfer it to Martha. During the process, they discovered that Brenda had indeed misused the money Daniel sent for the girl's care. She had spent most of it on drinks and gambling, leaving Sophie with only the basics to survive. The judge reviewing the case was outraged by the neglect demonstrated by Brenda. Besides losing custody of Sophie, she was ordered to repay all the money she had diverted, and also received a formal warning from the court. On the other hand, the bond between Sophie and Martha was evident to anyone who saw them together. The girl had flourished under her aunt's care, and Martha had rediscovered the sense of family she had lost so many years ago. Are you certain you want to transfer custody of your daughter? The judge asked during the final hearing. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Martha has already proven she loves my daughter and can offer her a stable home. I can continue working knowing Sophie is in good hands. And you, Sophie, do you want to keep living with your Aunt Martha? Yes, I do, the girl replied without hesitation. She's the best aunt in the world. The judge smiled, signing the documents that made the new family situation official. But the story wouldn't end there. Daniel, inspired by the love he saw between his daughter and Martha, decided to make a radical change in his life. Mrs. Martha, he said in a conversation after the hearing. "Would you accept me coming to live around here too? I can look for work in the area and stay close to Sophie without disrupting your lives." Martha was surprised by the proposal, but after thinking it over, she concluded it would be good for Sophie to have her father nearby. "Daniel, the farm is large. There's a small house in the back that my husband used as a workshop. With a few repairs, it could serve as a home for you." "That would be perfect, and I can help with the farm work too. I've always liked country life." And so what had begun as a tragedy transformed into a blessing for everyone. Sophie finally had the complete family she had always dreamed of, a present father and an aunt who loved her unconditionally. Martha rediscovered the joy of being part of a family, and Daniel found in rural life the peace he had been seeking for so long. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. 6 months later, Martha's cottage had been completely transformed. The back house had been lovingly renovated and now served as a home for Daniel, who had found work at an agricultural cooperative in the area. The backyard, once silent, now echoed with Sophie's laughter as she played and with lively conversations during family meals. Mrs. Margaret remained a constant presence in everyone's life. Having practically become an adoptive grandmother to Sophie, she came for lunch at the cottage every Sunday and helped the girl with her schoolwork during the week. The most remarkable change, however, was in Martha. The bitter, lonely woman had given way to someone who smiled often, who hummed while cooking, and who dedicated herself with renewed passion to caring for the garden that Sophie loved so much. "Aunt Martha," said Sophie on a Saturday afternoon, as the two were planting new flowers in the garden, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course, dear. You can ask me anything." "Why were you alone for so long? Weren't you sad?" Martha stopped working the soil and looked at the girl with a thoughtful expression. "I thought it was easier to live alone, Sophie. When the people we love leave or disappoint us, sometimes we build walls around our hearts so we won't hurt anymore. And now? Now I understand that the walls we build to avoid pain also keep us from being happy. You taught me that." Sophie smiled and continued planting the seedlings with the care Martha had taught her. After a few minutes of silence, she asked another question. "Aunt Martha, do you think my mother would be happy knowing I found you?" Martha felt her eyes well up. All those months she had wondered the same thing countless times. "I'm sure she would, dear. Your mother always wanted you to grow up surrounded by love and care, and that's what you have here. And you know what else?" continued Sophie, with the simple wisdom of children. "I think it was her who helped me find Grandpa's car that day." The girl's observation touched Martha deeply. One way or another, Catherine had managed to bring her family together through her daughter. The abandoned car in the woodlands had been the missing link to reconnect bonds that seemed lost forever. That weekend, Daniel suggested they all go to the woodlands to see the car where it all began. It was the first time he would visit the place where his daughter had spent that frightening night alone. "I need to see where my daughter slept when she had nowhere else to go," said Daniel, his voice heavy with emotion. The walk to the woodlands was like a family pilgrimage. Daniel held Sophie's hand, Martha walked beside them, and Mrs. Margaret accompanied them, always attentive and caring. When they reached the car, now even more covered by the continuing growth of vegetation, Daniel knelt before the vehicle with tears in his eyes. "Forgive me, my daughter. Forgive me for leaving you alone when you needed me most." "Dad, you don't need to apologize," said Sophie, hugging him. "If you hadn't gone to work, I never would have found Aunt Martha and Mrs. Margaret. Sometimes bad things happen so that good things can happen later." The depth of that reflection, coming from a child of only 6 years old, left all the adults impressed. Sophie had transformed her suffering into wisdom, her loneliness into gratitude. "You know what we can do?" suggested Martha. "We can clean up the car and turn this place into a special little family spot, a place we can come to whenever we want to remember how our family found each other." The idea was met with enthusiasm. During the following weeks, Daniel, Martha, and Sophie returned several times to the woodlands to clean the car and create a small garden around it. They removed the moss and vegetation that had grown over the metal, revealing the original blue paint once again. The trunk, which had held the family treasures for so many years, was carefully cleaned and reorganized. The photographs and documents were placed in proper albums, but a copy of each important item was left in the original location as a tribute to Grandpa Arthur, who had unintentionally orchestrated that family reunion. "Grandpa Arthur must be happy up in heaven, knowing he managed to bring the family together again," said Sophie, touching the car's steering wheel affectionately. During one of those visits, they made a discovery that would change their lives even further. Daniel, fiddling with the back seat, found a small hidden lever that opened a secret compartment under the seat. Inside the compartment was a leather bag with even older documents and, to everyone's surprise, some gold eagles that Grandpa Arthur had saved as an emergency reserve for the family. "This must be worth a good amount today," observed Mrs. Margaret, examining the coins carefully. Daniel looked at Martha and Sophie. "This gold belongs to the whole family. Let's decide together what to do with it." After much discussion, they decided to use part of the gold to improve the cottage's infrastructure, building an artesian well and installing solar power to reduce costs. Another part would be kept as an emergency reserve, and a smaller amount would be used to create an education fund for Sophie. But the most important discovery wasn't the gold. It was a letter that Grandpa Arthur had left to be found by some family member in the future. The letter, written in the careful handwriting they already knew from his other correspondence, said, "If someone from my family is reading this letter, it means my old car has fulfilled its final purpose, to reunite those whom fate separated. I always believed that true love is stronger than any misunderstanding, and that families find ways to reconnect when there is genuine love among their members. Keep each other as the most precious treasure you possess, because at the end of life, that's what truly matters. With all my love, Arthur." Reading the letter deeply moved everyone present. It was as if Grandpa Arthur had foreseen that one day someone in his family would need that message of hope and unity. Sophie, though still too young to fully understand the meaning of those words, grasped the essential point. Her family was united again, and that was what mattered most. From that day on, the car in the Woodlands became a regular pilgrimage point for the family. They went there on important birthdays, on special Sundays whenever they wanted to give thanks for the fortune of having found each other. 1 year after the first meeting between Sophie and Martha, they organized a special party at the cottage. They invited all the neighbors, including some of the distant relatives mentioned on the old map that Sophie had found. The party was a success. The cottage, which for years had been quiet and melancholy, vibrated with laughter, lively conversation and music. Sophie, now 7 years old, ran around the yard playing with other children who had come with the family. During the party, Daniel made a speech that moved everyone. "I want to thank my daughter Sophie, who had the courage to go out alone in search of her family. I want to thank Mrs. Martha, who opened her heart to an unknown child and taught us the true meaning of unconditional love. And I want to thank Mrs. Margaret, who was the guardian angel my daughter needed at the most difficult moment of her life." Martha, visibly moved, took the floor. "For years, I lived convinced that it was better to be alone than to risk suffering again. But this special girl," she said, pointing to Sophie, "taught me that love is worth any risk, and that true families are the ones we choose with our hearts." Mrs. Margaret, always emotional, couldn't speak without crying. "I always believed my mission as an educator was to teach children. But Sophie taught me that sometimes it is they who have the most important lessons to give us." The party continued late into the night, with stories being shared, family recipes being exchanged, and plans for the future being made together. But the biggest surprise of the night came when Sophie asked to speak. Even though she was the youngest of all, she climbed onto a chair so they could see her better, and with the seriousness that only children can have, said, "I wanted to tell everyone that I learned something very important. When bad things happen to us, it's not because we deserve it, but sometimes it's to lead us to where we really need to be. I had to leave home and sleep alone in the Woodlands, but that's how I found my true family, and now I know I will never be alone again, because my family's love will always be with me, no matter what happens." The girl's speech left everyone present deeply touched. There was a respectful silence, followed by a round of applause that echoed through the night. That same week, Martha decided to do something she had been thinking about for months. She sought out a lawyer to officially legalize Sophie's adoption, becoming not only her adoptive aunt but her legal grandmother as well. "I want her to have all the rights of a true granddaughter," she explained to the lawyer. "I want her to inherit the cottage. I want her to have my last name if she wants. I want her to know she belongs to this family forever." Daniel fully supported the decision. He had found in the countryside the peace he had been seeking for years, and he knew his daughter was in more than caring hands. The adoption process was quick and uncomplicated. The judge who had followed the case from the beginning was moved to see the transformation that had occurred in the lives of everyone involved. "This is the kind of case that reminds me why I chose to be a judge," he commented during the final ceremony. "Seeing families form and strengthen through love is what gives meaning to my work." Sophie, now officially Sophie Martha Harrison, proudly carried the name of the family that had welcomed her, but for her the official roles changed nothing. Martha had already been her grandmother in her heart for a long time. Life at the cottage continued at its peaceful and productive pace. Sophie went to school every day, always accompanied by either her father or her grandmother. Her grades were excellent, and she had become one of the most popular children in the class, always willing to help her classmates and share what she knew. Mrs. Margaret, proud of the girl's progress, often commented to other teachers, "Sophie is a special child. She went through situations that would break many adults, but managed to turn her suffering into compassion for others. And that's truly how she was. Sophie always approached children who seemed sad or lonely, offering friendship and support. It was as if her experience of abandonment and subsequent welcome had developed in her a special sensitivity to identify others who needed care. At home, she continued to be an obedient and affectionate child, always willing to help with household chores and care for the animals at the cottage. Her favorite moments were when she sat with Martha in the garden in the late afternoon, listening to family stories and sharing the events of the school day. Daniel, in turn, had adapted perfectly to rural life. His work at the agricultural cooperative gave him not only financial stability, but also the satisfaction of contributing to the development of the local community. He had become respected among the neighbors for his dedication to work and the evident affection he showed for his daughter and for Martha. On weekends, the family developed the habit of having picnics at the spot where Grandpa Arthur's car was. They would bring sandwiches, fruit, and lemonade, and spend the afternoons talking and playing in the shade of the trees. Sophie always brought a book to read aloud, a habit that Martha had encouraged since the first months of their life together. During one of these picnics, Sophie made a suggestion that would once again change the family dynamic. "Grandma Martha, why don't we invite Mrs. Margaret to live with us? She lives alone in a small house in Chicago, and here at the cottage there's plenty of room." The suggestion took everyone by surprise, but it made a lot of sense. Mrs. Margaret, now retired and with no family of her own, had become an integral part of all their lives. She had lunch at the cottage almost every day, helped Sophie with her studies, and had become a confidant to both Martha and Daniel. "That's an interesting idea," said Daniel. "Mrs. Margaret is practically family already. But do you think she'd want to leave city life?" pondered Martha. "We'll only know by asking," replied Sophie with childlike practicality. That same week, they took advantage of a Sunday lunch to make the proposal to Mrs. Margaret. The retired teacher was moved by the invitation. "Are you sure you want me here? I'm not young anymore. Sometimes I'm stubborn with my ways." "Mrs. Margaret," interrupted Martha, "you are part of this family. It would be an honor to have you living with us. And then I could help Sophie with her homework every day," added the girl herself, excitedly. Mrs. Margaret accepted the invitation with tears in her eyes. Her house in Chicago was sold, and the money was used to build a comfortable extension onto the main house of the cottage, creating an independent apartment integrated into the family home. Mrs. Margaret's move to the cottage marked the beginning of an even richer and more harmonious new phase in everyone's lives. The retired teacher brought her personal library with her, turning one of the rooms into a study where Sophie could read and do her homework with all the guidance she needed. More importantly, Mrs. Margaret brought her experience as an educator and her passion for teaching. She began offering tutoring for other children in the area who were struggling with their studies, turning the cottage into a small informal educational centre. "I always dreamed of having a school in the countryside," she confided to Martha one afternoon. "Now I feel I've finally realised that dream." Sophie thrived in this environment, rich with education and affection. Her reading skills advanced rapidly, and she developed a special love for history, inspired by the narratives Mrs. Margaret told about the regions and the country's past. 2 years after her arrival at the cottage, Sophie wrote an essay at school that made everyone proud. The theme was "My Family," and she wrote, "My family is special because it wasn't born together, but chose each other. I have a father who works very hard to give me what I need, a grandmother who teaches me to care for the plants and animals, and a teacher grandma who helps me learn about the world. Before, I thought family was only those born together, but now I know family is who stays with us in difficult times and celebrates with us in happy times. My family is like that." The essay was chosen to be read at the second-year graduation ceremony, and Sophie presented it with a confidence that impressed everyone. Martha, Daniel, and Mrs. Margaret were in the audience, their eyes misty with pride. After the ceremony, another student's mother commented to Martha, "Your granddaughter is a very special girl. It's rare to see a child so young with such a mature understanding of love and family. She went through experiences that taught her early on the value of the people who truly love us," replied Martha. That evening, during the celebratory dinner for Sophie's graduation, the girl made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I want to be a teacher when I grow up, just like Grandma Margaret." "And why do you want to be a teacher?" asked Daniel. "Because I want to teach other children that it's possible to be happy, even when bad things happen, and I want to show them that there is always someone in the world who can care for them with affection." The girl's answer deeply touched everyone present. Mrs. Margaret rose from her chair and gave Sophie a warm hug. "If you really want to be a teacher, I'll start teaching you everything I know right away." And so began a new phase in Sophie's education. In addition to regular school classes, she began special tutoring with Mrs. Margaret, learning not only basic subjects but also teaching techniques, child psychology adapted to her age, and most importantly, the art of being patient and understanding with those who are learning. The cottage continued to prosper under the joint management of Daniel and Martha. They diversified production, including organic produce they sold at the town market on Saturdays. Sophie always accompanied them, helping to pack the products and talking with customers, developing social and business skills from an early age. During these market days, Sophie often encountered other children who seemed to lack attention or affection. She developed the habit of giving small symbolic gifts, an extra piece of fruit, a drawing she had made, or simply a sincere hug. "That girl has a heart as big as the world," a market vendor commented to Martha. "She always finds a way to make others feel special." Martha smiled with pride, remembering how Sophie had come to them, a wounded and abandoned child who had transformed into a source of light and compassion for everyone around her. On her 9th birthday, Sophie asked for a different kind of party. Instead of gifts for herself, she wanted to collect toys and books to distribute to underprivileged children in the region. "I have everything I need," she explained to her family. "I have you, I have a cozy home, I have good food, and I have school. I want other children to at least have toys and books to dream with." The charity party was a success. In addition to the usual neighbors and friends, people from other towns who had heard about Sophie's initiative came. Hundreds of toys and books were collected, along with clothes and school supplies. The distribution of the donations was done by Sophie personally, accompanied by her family. She visited every house where there were children in need, delivering the presents and talking with each child about their dreams and hopes. "Do you know why I wanted to do this?" asked a little girl of the same age who had received a doll and some books. "Why?" asked the child, hugging the doll. "Because once I also needed help, and good people appeared to take care of me. Now I want to be one of those good people for you." That simple and sincere answer perfectly summarized what Sophie had learned throughout her journey. Suffering can teach us compassion, and gratitude can motivate us to be instruments of kindness in the lives of others. That night, after a day full of emotions and giving, the family gathered in the garden to talk about the day's events. Sophie was visibly tired, but her eyes shone with satisfaction. "Today was the best birthday of my life," she declared, "because I could make other children smile." "And did that make you happy?" asked Martha. "Very happy, Grandma. I think that's how I want to live always, doing things that make people smile." Daniel looked at his daughter with an admiration that went beyond paternal love. He saw in her an emotional maturity and a generosity of spirit that were rare at any age but especially remarkable in a 9-year-old child. "Sophie," he said, "you make me proud every day, not just because you're my daughter, but because of the person you've chosen to be." "Daddy, I just learned from all of you. Grandma Martha taught me that it's better to share than to keep things just for myself. Grandma Margaret taught me that teaching is a form of love. And you taught me that working hard is important, but being present for the people we love is even more important." Mrs. Margaret, who had remained silent, listening to that touching conversation, finally spoke. "Sophie, in all my years as an educator, I have taught hundreds of children, but you are the one who has taught me the most. You taught me that wisdom does not come from age, but from the ability to transform suffering into love. That conversation in the garden, under the stars of a clear countryside night, would be forever etched in the memory of all present. It was one of those rare moments when life pauses and allows us to recognize the beauty and perfection of what we have built together." Years passed, and Sophie continued growing in the loving and stimulating environment of the cottage. Her studies progressed exceptionally, always with the careful guidance of Mrs. Margaret and the unconditional support of Martha and Daniel. When she turned 12, Sophie had already read all the books in Mrs. Margaret's library and had begun writing her own stories. Her stories always spoke of families who found each other, children who discovered their inner strength, and adults who learned to love again. "You should think about sending some of these stories to youth literary contests," suggested Mrs. Margaret after reading a particularly touching story about a tree that sheltered orphaned animals. "Do you think they're good enough? Sophie, your stories have something that many adult works fail to have: genuine emotion and true hope." Encouraged by her family, Sophie began participating in regional and national literary contests. To everyone's surprise, her stories began winning awards and even being published in magazines specializing in youth literature. The first major prize came when she was 13. Her story, The Girl and the Moss-Covered Car, won first place in a national young writers contest. The story, based on her own experience, deeply touched the judges. The award ceremony was in the state capital, and the whole family traveled to accompany Sophie. Seeing the girl on stage, receiving the trophy and speaking with maturity about inspiration and overcoming was a moment of indescribable pride for everyone. "And I dedicate this award to my family," said Sophie into the microphone, "who taught me that no matter how dark the moment we are living through may be, there is always a light waiting to be found." That night, in the hotel where they were staying, Daniel made a reflection that summed up everyone's feelings. Who would have thought that the scared little girl who slept alone in the woodlands would become an award-winning, admired young writer? "She always had that light inside her," replied Martha. "She just needed people to believe in her and give her the opportunity to shine. And now she's lighting the way for other children through her stories," added Mrs. Margaret. Sophie's literary success brought unexpected opportunities. She began to be invited to speak at schools about her experience and the importance of reading and writing. Her talks, always accompanied by a family member, were touching events where she shared her story naturally and inspired other children. "What I want you to understand," she said during one of these talks to children at a public school, "is that no matter what difficulties you are facing now, what matters is that you don't stop dreaming and don't lose hope that better days will come." A teacher at the school later commented to Mrs. Margaret, "It's incredible to see a teenager speaking with such wisdom and compassion. She truly touches the children's hearts." By age 15, Sophie had already published a book of children's stories and was preparing to enter high school with a full scholarship at a prestigious school in Chicago. The offer had come through her literary awards, but it caused a temporary family crisis. "I don't want to move to Chicago," declared Sophie at a family meeting called specifically to discuss the matter. "I want to keep studying here, close to you all." "But Sophie," argued Daniel, "this is a unique opportunity. A school of excellence, specialist teachers, resources you won't find around here. Dad, I already have the best education in the world, your love and Grandma Margaret's teachings. The rest I can learn anywhere." Martha, who had remained silent during the debate, finally spoke up. "Sophie, my dear, why don't you give it a try? If you don't like it, you can come back any time. We're not going anywhere." "But I don't want to be far from you all." "And you won't be," said Mrs. Margaret. "It's only an hour-and-a-half drive. You can come home every weekend and we can visit you whenever you want." After much discussion and a few tears, Sophie agreed to at least visit the school and see how she would feel there. The visit revealed a truly stimulating environment, with an extensive library, well-equipped labs, and teachers who were enthusiastic about having an award-winning young writer in their midst. "What did you think?" asked Daniel on the way back from the visit. "I admit I liked it," replied Sophie, "but I missed home the whole time." "That's natural," comforted Martha. "Home is home, but sometimes we need to challenge ourselves to grow." "Do you really think I should go?" "We think you should follow your heart," said Mrs. Margaret. "And your heart, I know, wants to learn as much as possible so you can help more people through your writing and your future career as an educator." Sophie decided to accept the scholarship, but with one condition: she would come home every weekend, without exception. The family agreed and preparations began for this next change in everyone's life. The first year of high school was challenging, but Sophie adapted with the same determination she had shown in all the other difficult situations in her life. Her classmates initially saw her as the country girl who writes books, but soon discovered she was much more than that: a loyal friend, a dedicated student, and a person with an extraordinary ability to listen and support others. "Sophie is different from other girls our age," a classmate remarked to her mother. "She seems to understand things we're still trying to figure out." The teachers also noticed her special qualities. Beyond her evident literary talent, Sophie demonstrated an emotional maturity and empathy that set her apart in any group. "It's rare to find a young woman who combines academic intelligence with emotional wisdom like she does," the literature teacher commented during a faculty meeting. During history classes, Sophie often related the events being studied to contemporary situations, making connections that impressed both teachers and classmates. "Do you know why it's important to study the past?" she asked in a presentation about internal migrations in Brazil. "Because it helps us understand that people have always sought places where they could be happy and care for their families. And that's no different from what happens today." Her presentation was so engaging that several classmates approached her afterward to talk about their own family experiences. Sophie had developed a natural ability to make people open up and share their stories. On weekends at the cottage, she would share all the school news with the family, but also listened attentively to the updates from rural life. Martha had started keeping bees and producing honey. Daniel had expanded the vegetable garden and begun supplying greens to some local restaurants, and Mrs. Margaret had formalized her tutoring lessons, turning them into a social project recognized by the city council. "I'm proud to see how our family keeps growing and helping other people," Sophie said during one of these weekend conversations. "You are my examples of how to use our talents to do good. And you are our example of how to overcome difficulties and turn them into strength to help others," Martha replied. In her second year of high school, Sophie began participating in a school volunteer project that brought educational and recreational activities to children in underprivileged communities. Her personal experience and natural talent for connecting with children made her one of the program's most effective volunteers. "Sophie has a special gift for working with children who have experienced trauma or abandonment," observed the project coordinator. "She earns their trust in a way I rarely see in young people her age." One of the children served by the project was an 8-year-old boy named Leo, who had been abandoned by his mother and lived with an aunt who could barely support him. Leo was withdrawn, distrustful, and refused to participate in most activities. Sophie immediately recognized the family's suffering in the boy's eyes. For several weeks, She dedicated herself especially to earning his trust, sharing stories and games without ever forcing closeness. "Why don't you want to play with the other boys?" she asked one day, sitting beside Leo as he watched the activities from a distance. "They wouldn't want to be my friends anyway," the boy replied, with a sadness that broke Sophie's heart. "Why do you think that?" "Because nobody wants to be friends with an abandoned boy." Sophie felt her chest tighten upon hearing those words, which echoed her own feelings from years past. "Leo, can I tell you a secret?" The boy looked at her with curiosity. "I was an abandoned girl too. My stepmother threw me out of the house when I was 6, and I had to sleep alone in the woodlands." Leo's eyes widened in disbelief. "Is that true?" "It's true. And do you know what happened next? I found a family that truly loves me, that takes care of me and makes me feel special every day." "How did you find that family?" "By not giving up on looking for good people." "And do you know the secret to finding good people?" "What is it?" "To be a good person yourself. And you seem like a very good boy." From that conversation on, Leo began to open up gradually. Sophie became his special mentor, and over the following months, she witnessed the boy's transformation from a closed-off, distrustful child into a more confident and sociable one. "What you did with Leo was extraordinary," the project psychologist commented to Sophie. "You managed to reach him in a way that experienced professionals sometimes take months to achieve." "I just used what I learned from my own story," Sophie replied. "Sometimes those who have been through similar suffering can understand better." The success with Leo led Sophie to be invited to participate in other social projects, always involving children in vulnerable situations. She developed her own methodology that combined storytelling, creative activities, and one-on-one conversations. During the summer vacation, when she was 16, Sophie organized a literary camp at her own family's cottage. She invited 10 children who participated in the social projects to spend a week learning about reading, writing, and most importantly, about self-esteem and overcoming adversity. "We want them to see that it's possible to have a happy life even coming from difficult situations," Sophie explained to her family when presenting the camp idea. Daniel, Martha, and Mrs. Margaret enthusiastically supported the project, offering to help with food, transportation, and activities. The cottage was lovingly prepared to welcome the children, including a temporary library set up especially for the occasion. During the camp week, the children participated in creative writing workshops, outdoor reading sessions, educational farming activities, and most importantly, sharing circles where they could talk about their experiences and dreams. Leo, now 9 years old and much more confident, was one of the participating children. During one of the sharing circles, he surprised everyone. "Before I met Sophie, I thought I only had bad things in my life. But she taught me that everyone has good things too. You just have to learn to see them." "And what good things do you see in your life now?" Sophie asked. "I see that I have an aunt who loves me even though it's hard for her. I see that I'm good at math and can help other boys who struggle. And I see that I have friends like you who care about me." Leo's answer moved everyone present, including the adults supervising the activities. It was evident that Sophie's work was truly transforming those children's lives. On the last day of the camp, the children prepared a special presentation for Sophie's family. Each child told a story they had created themselves, all inspired by themes of overcoming, hope, and family. "Do you know what these stories have taught me?" Sophie said during the closing. "That each one of you has a special strength inside, capable of overcoming any difficulty, and that we all deserve to be loved and cared for." After the camp, Sophie received thank you letters from the children's parents and guardians. One letter, written by Leo's aunt, moved her particularly. "Sophie, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for Leo. He came home like a different boy. Now he smiles, plays, talks about his dreams. You gave him back his childhood. And to me, you restored the hope that we can be a happy family." This letter confirmed for Sophie that she had chosen the right path. Her life's mission was becoming more and more clearly defined, to use her experiences and talents to help other children discover their own strength and worth. In her final year of high school, Sophie had already decided she would study education in university. specializing in social education and educational psychology. Her excellent grades and her portfolio of volunteer work secured her several scholarship offers. "I am proud of the woman you are becoming," said Daniel during the high school graduation. "You honor our family, and you honor your own history. Dad, everything I am, I learned from you. You showed me that family isn't just who gave us life, but who chose to stay by our side and help us grow." At the graduation ceremony, Sophie was chosen to speak as the class representative. Her speech, titled "The Transformative Power of Love and Hope," deeply touched everyone present. "Dear classmates, teachers, and family, when I was a small child, I went through an experience that could have defined my life negatively forever. I was cast out of my home and had to sleep alone in the woodlands, not knowing if I had a future ahead of me. But it was exactly in that moment of greatest difficulty that I discovered something that changed everything. There are people in the world willing to love us unconditionally, and there are strengths within us that we never imagined we possessed. The education we received here gave us knowledge, but it was the people I met along the way who gave me wisdom. I learned that our story is not determined by the bad things that happen to us, but by how we choose to respond to those situations. Today, as I graduate, I want to make a public commitment. To Dedica, this was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought. How did this story of overcoming and family touch you? Leave your opinion in the comments with sincere words. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for more emotional stories like this one. End of story.